Thanks for staying with us. Planet Green Tree is 1-347-326-9626. It's officially episode 181. We were calling it Bonafide. I may change the name of it. I was calling it Bonafide Revisited. Just got off the phone with Dr. Robert Townsend discussing looking forward into 2014, some reform movement and development of the compassion clubs. Also, we had Dan Riffle on the phone who told us some very, very interesting stories. What's happening in the legalization state of Colorado. Anyways, without further ado, I want to now go to our next guest. I'm going to get Rick Thompson back on the line. Adam Brook, one and only Adam Brook. Adam, thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming on the show. For many of you who don't know, and I don't know who wouldn't, but Adam Brook, of course, has been the MC for the Hash Bash and much other in the marijuana reform movement. But I think most notably, when you go to Hash Bash, there's a person that takes the mic and starts it up and closes it down and introduces everybody and really puts the entire mojo on the show. I think the one and only Adam Brook. Thanks for coming on the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So good to be with you. And I've started listening to your show in the last few months, and I'm very impressed and happy to be here.
I appreciate that a lot. It means a lot to me. We've been working on it, but in any event, you were away for a while, and it was a very unfortunate incident. And we only at your level of comfort we can talk about that. But I'm more curious, what were your observations in terms of, if at all, of any changes that took place in the community? From not visualizing it, seeing it every day.
In 2 years, it changed drastically. I've been telling people that, I've been working as an activist for going on a little over 20 years now, and not much has changed as drastically as the changes that happened in the 2 years that I was a guest of the Michigan Department of Corrections, where I might say the weed is flowing freely. It's not hard to get high in prison. But the interesting thing is that we fought very hard to get medical marijuana, and, that was a long process. And once it showed up and the law passed, we knew it was going to take years for things to work through the system, as has happened in California. It's been years, and they're just now getting to a sane system. In the last couple of years, things have just changed drastically because of court decisions that happened. I can tell you, I was sitting in prison, and guys would come in and say, man, they just closed all the dispensaries in the state. And I'm like, well, I talk to friends all the time that have shops open. So they might have ruled something in the courts, or sent out cease and desist letters, but that doesn't mean that everybody's complying. And I think the last couple of years we've had more people kind of stake their own path and kind of say, you know what, I believe I'm within the law, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open a club, and this is how I'm going to run it. I'm just fascinated at what's happened, and I've spent weeks and weeks literally learning. Of course, I'm coming from this educated point of view where I've been doing this for so long, but I'm fascinated by what I'm seeing. Some of it is very impressive, and some of it is very troubling, but we know that stuff's going to happen either way. It's just fascinating. I'm really impressed with the direction that Michigan's going. I really like these local ballot initiatives. I've always been a fan of those. Local control is really, and I've said this from the very beginning, local control is where it's at, and that's where they've been fighting against us, and that's where we've had some of our best victories. So I'm happy to see what's happened, and looking forward to getting back into the mix, actually.
Well, I was going to ask you, so I guess that would be an answer to the question of if you like where we're at. Is there anything that you don't like in terms of what's happened that you wish would have gone differently, or you think may have been a mistake? There's been, as you know,
sure.
As you know, there's not always unification amongst any community, any activist community, and at various times, the specific direction, battles take place and conflict erupts, but people prevail in the end. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I find that to be a very interesting question asked of me, the guy that puts on the hash bash. And it has nothing to do with Adam Brook. It has to do with the guy that puts on the hash bash. And hash bash causes me to bring people together who don't necessarily like each other, don't necessarily agree 100% with each other. But we all have one thing in common, and that's pot, weed, marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. That's my issue. I'm a one-issue kind of guy. If you want me to vote for you, I ask you one question. I don't care what you think about anything else. I work very well with a bunch of people that hate each other. And that's because my goal is to put on an event where everybody can come together and speak their little piece, and there's all kinds of people there willing to listen. Now, when you take a situation like medical marijuana and what's happened in Michigan in the last 5 years, you have obviously people who disagree with how things should be done, different models of clubs, dispensaries, whatever you want to call it. Personally, I think it's all good. Even the stuff that we know is illegal and the stuff that we know is not a positive thing, in my opinion, it's all good, because there are some people who will continue to run a black market operation no matter how legal or how decriminalized this gets. And those people, in my opinion, should still be protected from the law. I am one of those people who believes that there should be no laws against marijuana, period. My view doesn't play very well because legislators like to put limits so that they can say, well, we legalized pot, but we limited people to, a kilo, or we limited people to 1,000 pounds, and at that point we actually have to do something to them and criminalize it. Well, I disagree with all of that. I can say that I've been in some, and I use the word dispensaries because that's kind of a common term, but I've been in some clubs where I was very impressed by their business model and their business practices, but what they were doing was illegal. But that's okay, because they were trying to say this system and this model works for us. Your law needs to change. Then there are other places where they were running it by the book, and when the court ruled, they changed their system. And I went in and they said, hey, a year ago we were doing it this way, and now we're doing it this way. And I've been to places that were top shelf, and I've been to places that were, the bottom of the barrel. I'm impressed with what I see. This is America. Everyone thinks they can open a business. There are some people doing it extremely well, and there are some people just bumbling through. But this is marijuana. There's room for everybody, and I think we see that now in places like Colorado and Washington and California. I just saw an article that a Seattle cupcake shop was, a mainstream cupcake shop was filing for a permit in order to sell medibles. This is becoming mainstream, and people are starting to embrace it. And there will be people who will embrace things that the government has to crack down on because of some law or some limitation they decide is necessary. Personally, I don't agree with that, but I also am willing to make a deal with them. And if the government wants to sit down at the table and say, we're willing to do this, what limitations will you accept? I think we can work something out, personally. There's some pretty good models out there.
Let me ask you this. We were talking with Dan Riffle earlier, and he was giving his view on, the moment right now in Colorado, and I asked him about whether he thought, because of the limitations, as you were speaking about, of 1 ounce and 6 plants in Colorado, does that mean that the law enforcement community is going to not care if you have 1.5 ounces or 7 plants, or are they? I mean, and I'm talking about this phase. Maybe in 5 years, the answer would be absolutely not. Nobody cares anymore. But do you think that there will be?
Well, I like to use analogies, and as of late, I have found that the analogies to the civil rights movement are very similar to some of the issues in our situation. One of my issues is the fact that there are companies coming on board now who in the past said, yeah, we're all for progressive movement, but we're not going to actually fund the marijuana movement because that would look bad, or our stockholders don't like it, or we don't want troubles with the government. And okay, now they're coming on board and people are flocking to them and saying, hey, look, this company supports us and that company supports us. Personally, I wonder if when the lunch counters were opened up back in the 50s and people were now welcome, did they really go have a sandwich? Or did they say, you know what, I remember how those people treated me, and I'm just not going to sit down and spend my money with them. I think that what's happening in Colorado right now, I see the social media. I see people screaming and hollering about $400 ounces for legal pot. Well, I don't know if they've ever been to Amsterdam, but you pay that much there at least. And, the fact that it's not legal doesn't seem to affect anything. It's kind of they look the other way in Amsterdam. But now you have a model where you have medical patients able to purchase at one price, that they're not taxed. Because, again, how do you tax medicine? Why should marijuana medicine be taxed and not cancer drugs? I don't see the Cancer Society going to the government and saying, please tax us and give us more drugs. I don't get that. It's medicine. It shouldn't be taxed. But medical patients should have access to it freely, and we all know the health benefits. For me, it's about getting the word out and letting people see what's going on. The big thing now is to announce this big 56% of the population believes pot should be legal. Well, sure, we all knew this was going to happen. Once Colorado opened up and they found that people could get high and they weren't going to, commit all these horrendous crimes that they blame on people who smoke weed, I think people kind of had to accept the fact that it's not the dangerous product they claimed it once was. Reefer madness now kind of looks stupid. It used to just look foolish. So
let me ask you this. Dan Riffle,
sure,
who acknowledged that he was a former prosecutor. I was talking about whether or not there's going to be, less crime, and whether the statistics. The Bill Riley comment this past week that people aren't getting arrested for. Well, he said, well, that's not true. He agreed, but
no, right?
They don't go to prison and they don't go to jail. Do you agree with that?
I totally disagree with that. I can't tell you how many guys I met in prison I said, what are you here for? Oh, man, I sold a $10 bag of weed. I met one guy sold 3 $10 bags of weed, got busted each time, and they finally sent him to prison. Now, what's going to happen is cops are finally going to say, you know what? I can look the other way on this one. Just like I can look the other way on all kinds of other things that I look the other way on, I can add this to the list. Or that same officer, once again, think about the 1950s, when now an officer had to treat a black man like a human being. You think every officer did? Well, eventually those old white assholes, for lack of a better word, they died off. And it's just a matter of years before these old fuddy-duddies, and they're not necessarily old people, because we know that the older generation, 70, 80, 90 years old, they're pretty much on our side. But these 50, 60, and 70-year-old people who believed and bought the war on drugs and believed in reefer madness, I can't tell you how many times I've been invited to do an interview where it's really a debate, and they decide that they're going to have someone from the opposing team, and it's always the opposing side, and it's always some anti-drug crusader. And I can't tell you how many times they've quoted studies that are bogus. Like they've said that, well, you can smoke all the weed you want, it's going to kill brain cells. Well, we all know that's not true, and that the rhesus monkey study was fraudulent, and it didn't say what they said it was. But there are police officers who believe that, and who will berate some guy who they catch with some weed, and whether the law has changed or not, it's going to be a while before those officers get pushed to the side, or they get reprimanded enough times because their boss says, you know what, we don't need to do this. Yes, the person violated the law, but we now have these lax laws, and you can look the other way. It's going to take time, and I think we need to fight the cases that do come up. The courts have in my opinion, been working pretty. I mean, it takes a while, even in Oakland County, where they screwed me and they filed a motion that said you can't you mention medical marijuana at trial, and eventually that was overturned in the courts. Of course, my lawyer told me not to fight the motion, but we're not going to discuss that. But while I was in prison, they actually changed the law in Oakland County, and now you can't file that motion in court, which means that there are people like me who could walk into court and tell a jury of their peers, these are the facts, and here's the reason why, and I need your help on this one. And I believe juries will look the other way on many instances when they are educated about the law. And again, it all takes time. There's still cases in California, and they've had medical marijuana for years, and there's still raids happening. I just heard about raids in Detroit yesterday, 2 places raided by the state police and the Detroit Police Department. I thought Detroit had a law that said they weren't going to go after pot people, but obviously they found something illegal to go after them for. So I think cops are still going to do what they need to do. Don't forget, they have to spend their budgets, because if they don't spend their budget, they don't get it. And now that the federal government has outfitted them with all their militaristic gear, they figure they have a job to do. So they're still not your friends, folks.
You know, I was going to jump in one point that you made, which I've brought up a lot. I think it's an important point to make. And what you're talking about is, you know, statistically speaking, you know, we're over the 50% mark of Americans who are in favor of all-out legalization. The state of Michigan in 2008 voted 63% in favor of legalization. It's probably higher now. And any time a person charged with a marijuana crime impanels a jury, the pool itself, independent of whatever county it is, should know the defendant, the person charged with the crime, knows that at least, you know, 50% of the people voted for medical. So you've got a good chance of having individuals in the jury pool who voted for medical marijuana. And, you know, it's not like a murder case where the jury pool is made up of people that, you know, had a chance to vote on, you know, murder. They, you know, the murder law, that didn't happen. But this is a hot topic. It's something that's obviously people are discussing. And I do agree with you that it's a completely different environment. I always make the joke that, you know, after the case is over, you know, the jury doesn't really hear what's going on anyways, and they go in the back and they begin to deliberate, and they shut the door, and one of the jurors turns to the other one and says, didn't we pass a law in Michigan allowing for medical marijuana? Why did I take 3 days off of work to sit here? What were they talking about, that Section 8 nonsense in there? But, yeah, I think we passed a law, so I don't know why we're here. You know, like, just totally missing the boat, but just, you know, the fact that it was passed, you know, and I tell my clients all the time that if I have one opportunity to tell the story, your patient's story, your caregiver's story, why you had 11 or 13 plants, whatever, and it's one set of ears, and it's one story to be told to one set of ears, and you got the choice of the police, the prosecutor, the judge, or 12 people from the community, I'm going to take the 12 people from the community. See what I'm saying? So I agree with you. I want to emphasize that point, but go ahead and expand on that a little bit, because you're seeing it, and you know, go ahead.
Well, here's the problem. We all know, and the argument has been for many years, you have to request a jury trial. The problem is, and you know this as a lawyer, very few people who have not been charged with multiple crimes know this. When you get a ticket for weed, for possession, and you go to court, you have no concept of what the average individual who is sitting in prison has gone through. And the reason is because I was, for as an example, there were 14 different charges that they used against me. They filed some, they didn't file some. They dropped some, they filed others. They overcharge in order to get you to plea down. It's a big game. There are people who say, I am willing to play your game. I want a jury trial. Do what you want. And they have, many times, they have really good cases, no matter what the facts of the crime from the point of the prosecutor are. Because, you know, I do believe these prosecutors think that they're doing, you know, the right thing by enforcing the law and charging people when they're brought to them and things like that. I do believe that they're not doing this because they're evil people. I have a problem with people who are caught doing one thing, but the prosecutor charges them with something else. For instance, you're caught with a pound of marijuana. Under the Medical Marijuana Act, if you have a card or if you're a qualified patient, that is a misdemeanor. It's a violation of the limit. That's a misdemeanor. But they don't charge you with the violation of the Medical Marijuana Act limit. They charge you with possession with intent to distribute, which is a felony. And now you have to go into court and defend yourself against something that you didn't do. And the goal is to make it as difficult as possible on you. And maybe you will plea out. Well, in my case, it was very simple. If I'd have been convicted of any charge other than the one I pled to, I'd have done more time, either as an actual inmate or time served plus parole. I walked out of prison a free man. I was stoned an hour later. The system is what it is. You have to learn the rules. You have to play the game by the rules. If you know how to bend the rules and you can get away with it, so be it. But the system is set up so that you have your option, and your option, your current best option, is a jury trial. Because the people in the community, it only takes one. And the people in the community, like as you mentioned, have already voted for this. And the one thing I would mention that I would tell you as a lawyer and every other lawyer is this is no longer a piece of legislation that was enacted by the people. It's much stronger than that, in my opinion, because now the legislature has spoken on this piece of legislation, and they have put their 2 cents in. And when they were trying to pass all these crazy bills a year ago now, a year and a half ago, the Walsh bills and those things, when they were trying to do that, they could have passed any change they wanted to if they could have gotten enough guys to vote. But they were able to pass what they did, and, of course, they were barely able to do that. But now they've spoken, too. So now not only have the people spoken, but the legislature has spoken. And for many years, we begged them to come up with a solution. They didn't, so we did. Now they've spoken to our solution. I think that's important for the jury to know, that not only did the people enact this, but your legislatures have had their opportunity, and they made some changes, but they didn't change certain things in there. They left them alone. They made them.
That's another good way to say. That's a very strong argument. I agree. When we could debate whether or not the act has been implemented as it was supposed to. We can debate whether or not they did enough to protect or not enough to protect, and it is what it is. Without discussing the substance, one thing's for certain: they did unequivocally vote to enforce the law, and the things that they didn't change, they ratified by their
right.
Not changing them. For example, the right to grow marijuana. Like, this is unequivocally a right that they've that's the way that I look at it. Like, by them not changing the number of plants, how you can grow it, by maybe the structures and whatnot because of the closed lock facility and outdoor grow, but they did not.
Oh, but those things, but those type of things that they left alone are great. The fact that you have to keep your grow in a closed locked facility and you're not allowed to give anybody access, people need to learn that. When these CPS agents come to your door, or law enforcement comes to your door and they want to look at your grow, you can't show them your grow. That's a violation of the law.
I understand.
Nobody can have access. That's a good thing. The fact this change that they made in the law, where now you got to carry it around in a locked container. Okay, you know what? If they think they're helping people by doing that, fine. I mean, I'll give them that one. How does that hurt us as marijuana patients or medical marijuana patients, or even as recreational users?
Listen, the first thing I want to say is this. I was more or less agreeing with what you're saying, but emphasizing the point that of all the things that the legislature could have done and thought they needed to do, they did. That's what you're saying. And by
That's
them
right.
not seeing the issues of who's going to be the growers of marijuana, in essence, by not amending, changing in any way, ratified this right. That was the first point. And we're going to go over, anyone that's listening, if you hear we're at the end of the 2-hour mark, but we're going to go a few minutes over. We're over so we can get some more from Adam here. But, the thing about
I do think that, I was going to say, the thing they did with felons, when I entered the prison system, I learned very quickly that that's always going to happen. They want to do anything they can to protect people from what they think is harm. And they consider all felons harmful.
Right.
If you think a guy 10 years after he committed his felony is a safe guy in the community and now he can be a caregiver, okay, go ahead. But it's just nonsense. We all know that.
Well, I mean, that was one of, I think I wrote a blog about this, but there was there's not a lot of groups that are lobbying on behalf of convicted felons. It's a group that's easy to pick at, and it's a group that, right. So you're right. I mean, it is what it is. And a lot of it may be just because the system is brutal and people don't have choices. And, early on in their life or for whatever circumstance involving, poverty or education those are the people that are in the system. It's not always because I don't think people are born into the world per se and, they say, I want to go out and be a felon. I mean, there's so many circumstances.
No.
I mean, it's a human experience that leads people to that, and not everyone's they don't have the same opportunities. And I think, there's so many factors that go into it. And one of them is, the system is brutal, and you may not get a fair shake if you don't have a good lawyer. And
I mean, it's easy to get a felony. My neighbor said to me the other day, she heard me talking on the phone. She goes, I heard you talking on the phone to somebody. I didn't know you represent felons. And she said it in this way, like, felons are the worst people ever. And I said, selling a dime bag of marijuana is a felony. Possession of cocaine is a felony. It's very easy. So easy to get a felony, especially if you don't know your rights.
And people don't understand there is a hatred for felons. And the little story I have is I know somebody who puts events together in the business community, and they were looking for a speaker. And someone said, hey, what about that guy Denny McClain? Now, we all know Denny McClain was a World Series pitcher. We also know that he went to prison. And, he ran a business into the ground, and he does speaking engagements. And there are a lot of people, I think, that would be very interested in hearing Denny McClain speak. And the boss said he went to prison. I don't want him to speak for me. And that just hit me as odd because that's part of his experience. And he's not a monster. He was a white-collar criminal. He was one of the greatest pitchers of all time. He is a Detroit hero. And how could you not want him to speak to your company? And it's literally because he went to prison. And I'm just floored by that because, certain people are treated a certain way because of a felony conviction. You can't get certain licenses. You can't get a job certain places. My daughter's got a job at a coffee shop, and they're doing a background check to make coffee to serve to people. Absolutely bizarre. But people feel safe when they do things like that, and people feel safe when they don't have to treat felons as human beings because then they don't have to employ them, and they don't have to let them around their children. And, it's a fear thing. That's what this country's all about. And it's unfortunate.
What also goes along with that, unfortunately, is that in addition to this irrational fear of felons per se, it is it's drug convictions, right? Isn't that just as equally, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony? If you've got it may appear on your lien as a dangerous drugs conviction, and it could be just that. It could be a joint. It could be a roach. I mean, it could be someone that wasn't even theirs. And they got talked into 7411, and then they dropped dirty, because they were, for whatever reason, and then it gets revoked, and you end up with a conviction, and you lose your license. I mean, those are all.
I'm not sure if this is still the case, but didn't college kids lose their loans because they had drug convictions? Is that still the law?
Yes.
I mean, how do you not educate your community? How do you say we're not going to let you go to college on our dime because you got busted with a joint in high school? How does that help our community or our country? It's totally irrational. But a lot of what these legislators do is. And, we got to speak up. I mean, I'm going to tell everybody that's listening, you need to call your state senator, and you should call all the state senators and tell them how you think they should vote on these upcoming two bills. You have to do those things. Otherwise, nothing's going to change.
Yeah, that's more support for Dr. Townsend's position that people really need. There needs to be a centralized location for, organizing grassroots activism. And there
needs to be a weed community center is what there needs to be, a marijuana community center, where you can get all the information you need. You can get referrals. You can get whatever you might need. Unfortunately, to run something like that costs money. So now that we have these huge money-making operations that are involved in our industry, one of them or a few of them really need to say, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pick this individual, and he's going to or she's going to put together this group, and we're going to put it and we're going to fund it, and it's here for the community because that's desperately needed. It's amazing in the communities where medical marijuana has been the norm for some time. These things exist. In the states where medical marijuana is very, very difficult to get, there are organizations that you go to them and you say, this is what I need and this is, I think, will help me. And they walk you through the process because it's, very technical and they know how to do it. And it's like the local community thing. And there needs to be a place where people can go and feel comfortable and not have to worry that there's some guy, instead of selling grams out the back, selling pounds out the back, a community center where you can get the information you need and the referrals you need in order to learn and educate yourself and others about marijuana, hemp, cannabis, whatever whatever angle you have. It should all be there. And once a place like that gets set up, even if it's just in name with somebody running it before a physical building, I can guarantee you there are people that will come out of the woodwork who have great collections of cannabis, marijuana info and displays, and they'd love to help. There's hemp fiber people who will send you huge displays on hemp fiber and walls and bricks and all kinds of stuff. So it's out there. You just need to put it all together. And to me, it's a simple thing to do. You just have to have someone interested in doing it.
No, I agree with you. All right, so listen, Adam, we are at the end of the time here, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. It's fascinating. It's not enough time, obviously, and I hope you'll come back on.
Well, it never is. I will. I definitely want to come back and talk about Hash Bash and the history and what we've got going for the future. And, in my opinion, all anybody ever needs to know about Hash Bash is it's the first Saturday in April at high noon in the Diag at the University of Michigan. That's all you need to know. Show up. We'll have a good time.
And I'm sure that this interview will be a confirmation of my speaking engagement there. Just kidding, you don't have to answer now. I'll arrest you later for that. All right, good. I'm glad you laughed. All right, good. All right, I'm sure it's already begun, right? Isn't that what happens? Just going to get bombarded with people wanting to get on there, that stage, that place in Ann Arbor, the one and only, as it's been done, high noon.
Well, I had this great idea, and committee of one on this idea, so I haven't even discussed it with the others who make these decisions. But before I got out of prison, I said, man, it'd be great to go back, return, organize the Hash Bash again, and only allow people to speak who have been in prison, and bring Tommy Chong out, and bring Ed Rosenthal out, and bring these people that have done some time, and only, and then I thought, well, this isn't about me. And it never has been about me. It's really about weed and showing the man that you can pass any law you want, and we're still going to show up and smoke dope in your face. You need to change your ways because we're not here to hurt anybody. We used to stay on the Diag all day and have a great time. Now we come and go, and we're pretty peaceful and don't leave a big mess. So, that's my big thing is just leave us alone, let us have our good time and our kicks, and we'll move on. So I'd like to come back and talk about it, and we'll certainly do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks again, and thanks for sharing, and have a great night. Good talking to you.
You too. Take care.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up right there. Any final thoughts from the studio audience as we fade out? I'm going to pick a song right now, so make it fast. David Rodoy, are you anxious to leave? You got to stay for a while. What are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Gonna say again, 2016 Michigan. We're gonna do it. Everybody have faith. Don't lose faith.
And the Dan Riffle, David Rodoy boxing match will be scheduled. Just kidding. That was a funny exchange.
Birmingham Compassion Club is coming up here January 21st, 7 p.m. to 8:45 p.m.
All right.
The Baldwin Public Library, 300 West Merrill.
Thetford representation has something to say.
Thank you, Michael, for having me on the show. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of the medical marijuana and for all intents and purposes, the ending of prohibition against marijuana. And especially being part of the political system now to help bring about that change. I'm looking forward to 2014 as being a big year just for myself in possibly local legislative changes in Genesee County. I think it's going to come together. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a strong year for that. This is also a midterm election, so some other things could possibly happen as well.
Very well said, and I sense the excitement in your voice, and that's good. It's good when people are optimistic, and I like that. I think that it is a dynamic and interesting time, and at least at the minimum provides a lot of content for us to talk about week after week, right? Jamie will attest to that.
It seems to have done so.
It does. As we move into next week's 182, which doesn't even include the pre-Planet Green Trees shows, which we had, which are also all archived somewhere. Anyways, let's wrap it up right there. It's been a pleasure, and we will be back next week. I want to thank all our guests. Just to recap real quickly, we had Dr. Robert Townsend, of course, Dan Riffle of the Michigan Marijuana Policy Project, and the one and only Hash Bash organizer and really legend in the marijuana reform movement, Adam Brook. Thank you all for coming on the show, adding your thoughts, and archiving the movement as it moves forward, because we really have done that. Thanks to everybody participating, and we will be back next week.